Fear Not, Episode 65. Hi, I'm Billy Atwell, and I believe that consistently facing your fears is the only way to realize your truest self and to make those confident choices that will help you to obtain your deepest held hopes and dreams. I have faith that this podcast series will show you that you are not alone, that it will strengthen you and give you courage to face your fears, and that it will help you to permanently cross over into a life of living beyond your fears. Join me on this journey as we listen and learn from others as they share their experiences in facing and overcoming their own fears. Hello, everybody. Today, you and I are going to be joined by Dan Brule. Welcome, Dan. How are you today?
Very good. Thank you, Billy. Doing great.
Dan is a world-renowned pioneer in the field of breathwork and leader of the worldwide spiritual breathing movement. He's also one of the originators of breath therapy, and countless individuals now apply Dan's breathing exercises and techniques in their work and in their lives. Among those who do are Olympic champions and peak performers like Tony Robbins. Dan is also the author of multiple books, including Shut Up and Breathe, The Principles of Breath Therapy, and the newly released Just Breathe. Dan, can you take a few moments to fill in the gaps and maybe also give us a brief glimpse of your personal life?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm a fanatic about breathing. I have been since I was a child, and I learned CPR when I was an X-ray student in Boston. I was 19 years old, and in a X-ray technologist program there at Boston City Hospital, and I learned CPR, and I resuscitated somebody one day and just changed his life. I mean, he was clinically dead, and I breathed him back to life, but it changed my life because it reinforced this magic and the power of breathing. And then I was in the military. I was a medical person in the military. I was a deep sea diver, so I was mixing gases and doing deep sea diving. I was working a recompression chamber. I rescued some drowning people, and so, the breath, when you love what you do, the universe keeps giving you opportunities to do it. So, I was an expert at CPR. I probably resuscitated 19 people in my life over a 20-year period. And, I'd be at the beach and someone would drown. I'm in a restaurant, someone would choke on food. I'm on an airplane, somebody has a heart attack. I started to think maybe I was bad luck, And so I was really happy when I discovered rebirthing. I was at UMass in 1976, and I discovered what was then called the rebirthing method. And it gave me a chance, instead of coming along to people who were dead, breathing with them and making them alive, I could work with people who are alive and make them more alive. So one thing led to another. India, China, if anybody knew anything about breathing, I was kissing their feet or breathing down their neck, one or the other, until I got what I could get from them. And then I moved on. It's still happening today.
That sounds really cool and amazing. And thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah.
Dan, I was hoping today you would also share with us, what is breath work? Would you help us to understand that?
Sure. Yeah. Breath work is about awareness. It's the practice of breath awareness and conscious breathing. And developing the breath as a tool, as a bridge, as a force for health and growth, self-improvement, in body, mind, and spirit. So it's the conscious application of breathing, remedial breathing, you could call it. I mean, every spiritual path, every genuine spiritual path touches on the breath. Everything from yoga to martial arts to public speaking. At some point, you need some kind of breathing training. And so there are many things that fall under the umbrella of breath work, right across the spectrum, to really far out spiritual stuff, to everyday practical things for just getting rid of headaches or coping with anxiety or stress. So it's developing a relationship with the breath so that it becomes a therapeutic tool and a guide and a support for our performance and our growth.
Is it similar to meditative breathing, or is it parallel, different?
Well, the more meditative awareness you have, the more you'll get from any breathing exercises or techniques that you practice. So that's one of the first things we teach is breath awareness as a mindfulness practice, as a meditative practice. You use the breath as an object of your meditation. You just sit and you observe your breathing. And the way it works is the more aware we become of our breath, the more aware we become of many other things. The more conscious I become of my breathing, the more conscious I become in general. So, yeah, that's the first step in breath work, is developing this ability, this mindfulness practice, this ability to use a kind of a meditative awareness. Definitely, it's directly related.
So is breathwork something that we could use to help us deal with our anxiety and fear?
Oh, it's a no-brainer for that. I mean, the breath was designed for that. And, because when you get a handle on your breath, you get a handle on your physiology, your chemistry. You get a handle on your psychological state. You get a handle on your emotions. And so anxiety is one of these body, mind, emotional phenomenon, and the breath overlaps on those things. So as soon as you get a handle on the breath, you can start to handle anxiety, pain, stress, fear, all the way through the spectrum.
How so?
Well, if you're a Navy SEAL, I train warriors, martial artists, Navy SEALs. If you're a Navy SEAL and you get plopped down in the middle of who knows what, and none of your intelligence was right, and you can't find your team, and where you thought you were supposed to go, you realize there's 500 guys between you and that place, what do? You call your mother? You curl up in a ball? Do you reach for your weapon? No, you get control of your breath. Because when you get control of your breath, you control your focus. And once you get control of your focus, you can now use the breath in one of several ways. If you need to wake yourself up and energize yourself, you can launch into a particular breathing pattern. If you need to calm yourself down, you can use another breathing pattern. If you want to create, the main technique we teach to Navy SEALs is box breathing or square breathing, where you incorporate inhale, a pause, exhale, a pause, inhale, pause, exhale, pause, and all those phases are of equal length. You're getting a handle on your nervous system, parasympathetic, sympathetic branch of the nervous system. And so you're hacking, you're doing biohacking in a moment when you really need to show up at your best.
So if we wanted to explore breath work, where should we start?
Well, you start with breath watching, what I call breath watching. Just as a ritual, as a daily practice, when you first get up in the morning, maybe 2 or 3 times during the day, for 5 or 10 minutes, you just shut everything else out. You find a quiet place, you close your eyes, and you just observe your breathing. You become present with your breath. You observe your breath, notice your breath. You don't have to breathe in any special way. You're just connecting to the breath. You're practicing breath watching or breath awareness. That's where you start. And then we have some basic skills that I teach everyone, regardless of what you want to do with your breath. There are some basic skills. When you get those under your belt, then you can move forward towards whatever your goal is. So, for example, the 2 core exercises I teach in the beginning, they're really not techniques at all. One of them is sighing, a sigh of relief, and the other is yawning. So if you just sigh on purpose, and that means taking an in-breath that's twice as big as normal, and then giving yourself a nice sigh of relief. It doesn't have to be a sound. You could add some sound, but it's an shape. It's a typical classic sigh of relief. You take in a breath that's bigger than usual. You open and expand. And you give yourself a conscious sigh of relief. Everyone already knows how to do that, so that's where we start. So you're not doing anything artificial. You're just linking up to something that nature hardwires into us. I mean, when you're in a state of pain and the pain goes away, a sigh of relief happens by itself. You don't even have to do it. You don't have to think about it. If you're in fear or anxiety and the fear passes, a sigh of relief expresses itself. So what we discovered is, hey, if every time you're in pain and the pain goes away, the system responds with a sigh of relief. And every time you're afraid or anxious and the anxiety and the fear passes, your system naturally and automatically responds with a sigh of relief. Why don't we invite that sigh of relief? And then we can use it to move ourselves out of pain and anxiety states into comfort and pleasure and peace. It's that simple. So start with a sigh of relief. You don't need a teacher. You don't need an expert. You already know how to do it. Just exaggerate it and do it often. Do it for no reason at all. Do it when someone insults you. Do it when you're looking at something beautiful. Do it when you feel something unusual in your body. Develop this practice of taking an expansive inhale and a sigh of relief in those moments, in between things, before things, after things. It's a very basic way to start, and nobody needs any teaching to do it. You just start the practice that way.
So you really do sort of override your mind and your brain by inducing or reproducing the relief, it sounds like.
Yeah, because every psychological state, every emotional state, every physiological state has a corresponding breathing pattern or breathing quality. The way we would breathe when we're angry, upset, and afraid is very different than the way we breathe when we're calm and peaceful and loving. And so if we can identify those breathing patterns that are associated with those states, we can move in and out of those states by playing with those particular breathing patterns. So the sigh of relief is associated with a particular psychological, emotional, and physical state. And so by using that breath, we induce the states that it's associated with.
That's really cool sounding.
It's simple. Yeah.
It sounds like a really good tool to induce whatever state you need to be in. Yeah.
And exactly. And if you begin with breath awareness, so you do it as a practice where you just sit in a chair, the edge of your bed or whatever, and you develop that practice, then you bring breath awareness into your everyday activities. And you start to notice how you're breathing when you're stuck in traffic. You start to notice how you're breathing when you're confused or upset, because your breath awareness will click in. And then when you have a couple of skills, now, when you're alerted to holding your breath or over-breathing, or your breathing gets shallow or chaotic, now you're alerted to it because you've developed this awareness of your breathing, and then you can step in and you can begin to control and regulate your breath to manage whatever the situation is, internal or external.
Is there a sort of timeline? I know we sort of always like to have sort of goals and end result, and it will be done by such and such, but I would imagine that this would take some time to develop, correct? And
no, I mean you can take a few breaths and feel immediate changes in your state, and maybe the answer, there was a great Patanjali, who was the author of the Yoga Sutras. Somebody asked him, how long does it take to achieve the state that you've achieved? And he said, it depends on the intensity of your practice. And so all you need to do is practice in a regular way, even for a few days, and blood pressure goes down, cortisol levels are affected, attention is clearer, all kinds of benefits are very obvious in a very short time of practice. And then when you actually start to get some skills under your belt, now you can move into more and more difficult situations, and you find that you can center yourself, calm yourself, energize yourself, regardless of what's happening around you or what's happening inside of you. And on the battlefield or in the playing field or in the boardroom, that's really important.
Dan, would you share with us one of your core exercises that could help us deal with anxiety and fear?
Yeah, I will. I'll give you what I feel is the cutting edge. I mean, I've been doing this for 40 years, and we've arrived at something so utterly simple, you have to scratch your head and go, really? So this is what it is. You combine a yawn with a sigh of relief. You trigger the yawning reflex. Anybody can do that. You wiggle your jaw, and you trigger and activate the yawning reflex. And when the yawning reflex is happening, breathe in and out, in and out, in and out. Give yourself a long inhale, give yourself a sigh of relief while the yawn is engaged. So you see, when we yawn, something opens in our throat, something opens in the back of our jaw, and that's an energetic opening. And usually when people yawn, they freeze. They stretch. They might stretch if they're not too shy, but they kind of freeze, and they might even suppress the yawn, block their mouth, cover it, stuff it. And so I encourage people to yawn on purpose, activate the yawning reflex, and don't freeze. Breathe in and out, in and out, in and out while you're yawning. Take a long inhale, give yourself a sigh of relief, breathe in and out like that. Combine those two things, a yawn and a sigh of relief. Sounds simple, doesn't it?
It does.
It's so powerful. We're putting teams together. You have a SEAL team, you have a corporate team, you have a sports team. They lock arms, they yawn, and they breathe like this together, and they bond in a really cool way. Their intuition gets heightened. They sense each other better. You look at something, and I have an urge to turn that way. You feel something, and I have a sense. It creates a really amazing connection when people breathe together like that. And when you're doing it by yourself, when you think about it, the yawn is triggered. It's not something you can do. You can trigger it, you can suppress it, but when it's happening, we're not doing it, right? It takes over our system. And so that's an important phenomenon, because we look at, well, what else has the power to take over our system? What else can we trigger? What else can we suppress? Emotions are a good example, right? I can trigger an emotion, I can suppress an emotion, but when that emotion is coming out through me, it takes over my system. So when you learn to breathe while you yawn, you're developing a relationship with something that takes over your system. And fear can take over our system. Pain can take over our system. And so this practice of breathing while you yawn, we're opening the way to begin to get in to what normally would be, autonomic nervous system reactions, uncontrollable, so-called, automatic or unconscious things. We start to hack into those things. So it's very simple. You trigger a yawn. And you breathe in and out while you're yawning. And what's happening is, since the yawn is triggered by an ancient part of our brain, and when we decide and choose to breathe deliberately, we're using a different respiratory center in our brain, we're cutting new neural pathways. And this is just my theory, but I'm not going to wait till it's proven. I was talking about this stuff 40 years ago, and I had to wait 20, 30 years before science and medicine caught up with us. I'm so glad they finally did. But now we're on to the really new and cool stuff, which is using the breath to hack into our immune system, hack into our autonomic nervous system.
Yeah, I find it fascinating that you can use those physical attributes to create a state of mind. I come from an acting background where, you feed yourself a scenario and you let that emotional build, and your mind believes it. I've never really thought about. Yeah, I never really thought. Go ahead.
It's working against us if we're not careful. If we start catastrophizing, or whatever you call, thinking about things that bother us, worrying about this and that, we're putting ourselves into an anxiety state without realizing it. So that's happening already. So we might as well take charge of the process and do it on purpose, and visualize things that generate emotions that are high frequency emotions, gratitude, appreciation, and breathe while we're doing it. So it's not just a head thing, it's a cellular thing, and it gets locked into our system, and we gradually transform, we repattern our mind-body system. It gets accustomed to certain states. I mean, if I read the newspaper every day and I listen to TV every night, I'm living in a certain fear state. If it bleeds, it leads, right? If it's something horrible happening, they're going to be in my face with it. And we don't realize how that accumulates in us, and it kind of keeps us on the edge of anxiety and survival and fear without realizing it. And so we can intervene with positive psychology, visualization, and breathing all combined.
We really are masters of our mind, aren't we?
If not us, who? The advertisers, our parents, old programs, conditioning we got as children. Yeah, it's our responsibility to use our creative powers, our powers of consciousness to live deliberately and create the kind of life we want, and not just think we're victims of everything and everybody.
Dan, if someone would like to connect with you and learn more about breath work, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Breathmastery.com, breathmastery.com. And from there, I have a blog, I have articles. I have a book, Just Breathe, recently published by Simon & Schuster. You can link to that book there. But my website is probably the easiest place, breathmastery.com. And anyone can email me, Dan at Breath Mastery. I answer all my emails.
And Dan, what parting advice would you like to leave with us today?
If you can train yourself to take a breath in times when something activates you, when you get upset or someone praises you, you see something beautiful, you see something terrible, you feel something unusual, something gets your attention. If you can begin to train yourself to take a breath in those moments, so that instead of your mind getting activated or your body getting activated, what gets activated is your breath. So my advice is anytime anything arises in consciousness, anytime you're aware of something, perceiving something through one of your senses and it grabs your attention, let it remind you to take a breath. Deliberately take a breath in those moments. And that opens the door to being able to respond instead of react. And it becomes a process or a method by which everything reminds you to center yourself, to open yourself, to relax yourself. And so it's a practice. It's a very conscious practice of just, hey, the phone rings, take a breath before you answer it. You finish a conversation, take a breath. You're about to get up from a chair, take a breath. You just sat down in the chair, take a breath. Somebody just got through telling you something. Breathe it in, what they just said. You see something beautiful, a sunset. Breathe it in. Start to bring breath awareness and conscious breathing into events and interactions and experiences in your life, and it's going to open up amazing, amazing possibilities.
Sounds amazing, and something very much to consider and to do. I want to let everyone know, too, that Dan has generously donated a copy of his new book, Just Breathe, that we'll be giving away. So if you'd like an opportunity to win that book, visit the giveaways page at livingbeyondyourfears.com to submit your free entry form today. Dan, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show and talking to us about breath work and sharing some techniques and sharing your wisdom and knowledge with us today.
Well, yeah, thank you. And I love the idea, and I love what you're doing, living beyond your fears. I mean, we come home, we have to go through fear. You can't avoid it, but you can get through it with breath work, with positive psychology. When you get to the other side, man, we're free. So thank you for the work you're doing.
Thank you for joining me today. And remember, you cannot achieve everything, but you do have the God-given ability to achieve anything. So stay focused, out of fear, and keep on keeping on. Until next time, be well and peaceful. For more information on today's episode and guest, or for resources that will assist you in overcoming your fears, visit livingbeyondyourfears.com. And don't forget to subscribe to this podcast, where 3 times a week we move to a life beyond our fears.